Sorry. I turned to Megan, seriously, you probably heard me, and said, what are we going to talk about?
Oh, no.
Like we don't even know what we're doing. Sorry. My name is Melissa, and this is Megan, and we are both registered dietitians with the Tulsa Health Department. It's All About Kids program. And tonight is our cooking demo. We do these on the 2nd and starting in September, the 4th Thursdays of every month. And tonight we're talking about feeding your school-age child, which school's starting, and I know a lot of times parents talk about how difficult it is to get their kids to eat what they want them to eat. And I don't know, I'm gonna be on that people are gonna get mad at me for this. There's no special trick to feeding your child. There is no magic pill or magic food or magic wand that's going to get your picky child to not be a picky child. However, consistency and modeling of good behaviors and good habits and getting them involved in picking out the foods and making the foods is going to help them learn how to be really competent eaters. So Megan and I both follow what's called the Division of Responsibility. It's a school of thought created by Ellen Satter. So if you go to the Ellen Satter Institute, there's a lot of great resources there. But basically it states that there is a division of responsibility in feeding, and it is the caregiver or parent's job to say what you're eating and when. So this is what we're eating, and these are our specific meal times. So you know there's a breakfast zone and a snack zone and a lunch zone and a snack zone and a dinner zone, so they know another meal is coming. And then it's the child's job to decide if they're going to eat, and if they do, how much of it they're going to eat. So you sit down to dinner as a family. These are the foods. Don't go out of your way to make foods you know they hate.
Yeah.
Because, it's not helping anybody. There's foods that everybody, there's foods I hate, there's foods you hate. It doesn't make us bad eaters, it just makes us not like some foods. But make sure there's something on there that they enjoy, but also it's what everybody's eating, not mom and dad are eating this and kids are eating kid food. I think we've gotten to a habit of thinking kids only eat 5 things. And I don't think that's the case.
No.
I think kids eat what's in front of them and what's normal to them, and that's what they see their parents eating and what they see every day.
Yeah, and we always recommend, they've done a study where I think it's up to 20 times of continuing to expose your child to the same food, because you might think like, oh, my child won't eat the green beans, but then one day they eat a ton of them. Well, just continue to continue to expose them to the green beans, getting them involved in making the food, which is what we're going to talk about today more, because it makes them feel really proud of themselves for making that food. They want to get more involved, and even talking with them about different spices as they learn that. Like, what spices do you think would be on the green beans? And maybe they don't even try it, but they're being exposed to it, they're seeing it. Even if they taste it, they still may not like it, but continuing to offer it.
And also talking about, I know I've actually talked to a couple of kids. We had a cooking club this summer, and I was working with some kids, and we were putting together one of the recipes, and they're like, well, I don't want to eat this. And I was like, you know what? I will never make you eat anything. I will never force you to eat anything. And they're like, well, you might force some people. I'm like, no, I've never made anybody eat anything. And they know I've got a little boy at home, and they said, well, you probably make your son eat stuff. And I said, you know what, I don't. I give it to him, and if he eats it, he eats it, and if he doesn't, he doesn't. And they were like, but you don't make him try it? I said, no, it's on his plate. And I'm like, but here's the thing. If he doesn't eat it, and dinner's over, I don't make him anything else. I don't then get up and make him another meal. He knows that the next time he eats is breakfast. So if he's hungry, then maybe the next time he'll think about that. And they were like, it never occurred to them that, you eat what's in front of you and you're not going to get something different. And then I was reading a book. It's called It's Not About the Broccoli. And it's a very good book, and it's about the psychology of eating. And it was talking about how some kids are afraid to even admit that they like foods because they're afraid that they're going to have to eat the whole thing. So they'll take the bite, and even if they like it, they're like, but I don't want to admit I like it because then they're going to make me eat it and I'll have to eat it all the time. So the whole clearing your plate thing, it's hard. I try, and sometimes I'm like, one more bite. But getting your kids the autonomy to choose when they're hungry and when they're not is going to go a long way in helping them be a competent eater.
Yes. So
that being said,
yes, we're going to be doing pizza today. So we are going to be showing you how to make homemade dough, which is a lot of fun, even for real little. I have a 17-month-old, and even her playing with it, getting that fun in the kitchen and the texture of it and the feel is fun. And then for the older ones, helping top it, because we're just going to be doing a cheese pizza today. But for the older kids, even for the younger kids too, having a variety out, you can chop up different vegetables, so that gets them, you know, interested in more vegetables, having that out, and then letting them build their own pizza. So we are going to be starting today with making the crust.
Yes.
And we're going to be doing a bread flour.
So we are using bread flour today to make this crust, which is a little bit different than all-purpose flour because it has a higher gluten content. Gluten is the protein that's found in bread that gives baked goods their structure. So it's made from a harder wheat. So harder wheat flours are going to be higher in gluten, and then softer wheat flours are going to be lower in gluten. And that's what you're going to find like in your pastry flour and your cake flours, where you don't want that really structure. You just want it to be moist and, you know, yummy like a pie or a cake. So we are putting in 2 2/3 cup of flour. You may notice on your recipe cards in front of you, and the one that Lori's going to post in the comments when we're done with this, that it says 1 2/3 cup of flour. That is a typo, and it's incorrect. So if there are pens, I would say switch it and change it to 2 2/3 cup, because apparently when I was typing, I mixed my 1 and my 2 together. And we were trying to make the dough up today, and we're like, why does this needs more flour? Why is this so wet? It's not working. And then we're like, I bet we did it wrong. And I did. I typed it up wrong. And so you'll notice, I'm not sure if you can see through the food processor, that I am scooping my flour and then leveling it and scraping it off. When you're measuring flour, that's how you want to do it. You don't want to just scoop it up and pack it in, because it's going to be too dense. It's gonna be a little bit too dense, and then whatever you're baking or making with the flour is going to have too much of that in there.
This is definitely a fun activity for kids too. We'll have a sheet posted at the end, and then the participants that are here today, you will get one, and it breaks it down by kids' ages on what activities they can do in the kitchen. And then, you know, obviously, if your kid can do a little bit more, even
Well, I
if
mean,
it's
you
in the
know your
age
child
gap.
better than anybody else. So just because a list on Facebook says that your 3-year-old should be doing one thing, it doesn't mean they should. Every kid is different.
Just a guideline
But
to go by.
there are certain age-appropriate tasks that are important for kids to do in the kitchen. To get them involved in the cooking, to get them, you know, exploring with new foods, to even get them so even if they're not gonna eat all the foods or like all the foods, that when they encounter a new food, they know how to do it. So they know how to look at something new on their plate and be like, you know what, I can relate that to something I've already seen. I don't think I'm gonna like it, so I'm probably just gonna say no thank you. Instead of putting something in front of a child and having them go like, bleh, gross, bleh. Which in cooking club, that's our only rule about food, is we will never force you to eat it, but you cannot have bad manners when you are encountering a food that you are unfamiliar with. So I just put in a tablespoon of yeast, and I'm putting in a tablespoon of sugar, and then I've got my bread flour in there. Megan's gonna get our lid. And I'm just gonna pulse that to mix it up a little bit. I'm then gonna take 3/4 cup of water and 1 tablespoon of olive oil and put that together into my liquid measure.
Ooh, so Eleanor had a question. Can
Yes.
I use this dough on the grill?
You know what? You can use
Yeah,
this
that
dough
would
on
be
the grill.
really good.
That would be really good. I would make sure that your grill is very hot and very well oiled before you do it, because you want to make sure that it doesn't slide right through the grates. So you want it to really, when it makes contact with that,
It would
seize
be
up.
a good smoky flavor.
Yeah, that would be really yum.
good.
Okay, so I'm going to turn my food processor on low, and I'm going to, wait, yeah, I do that. Yeah. I'm gonna pour this in slowly. Sorry, it's been a really long day.
We've made a lot
We are
of dough.
definitely on point tonight. See, a little bit comes out and it looks like smoke. I have a story about that when I turn off the food processor. Okay, I've got all of my liquid in there and I'm gonna let that sit for about 10 minutes so it can, the yeast can start activating before I add the salt and add the rest to it. But I'm gonna tell a little story about food processor for a second. So when Megan and I write these recipes, or adapt them, this one's adapted from an America's Test Kitchen Cooking with Kids cookbook, which is amazing if you have kids to cook with. So I went back to Chicago for the 4th of July, and I was doing this recipe with my nieces and nephews, and I went to go make the dough while everybody was at the pool. And I was using my mom's food processor that she got for her wedding, which was 50 years ago. They just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. And if you notice, when I was putting in the liquid, it got little puffs of flour were coming up. And so I was doing that when I was there, and there was a lot of flour. And it was a lot of flour. And it was just, and I realized that was not flour. That was smoke. It was smoking. It was totally like this close to being on fire. So in the efforts to test this recipe, I did destroy my mother's 50-year-old food processor. But I gotta say, she really needed a new one. So it's not that bad. But if a lot of smoke is coming out or a lot of flour is coming out, it might be smoke. So check your food processor.
Make sure it's okay. New Christmas present.
Yeah, I know, right? We know what she's getting for Christmas from the Hornsbecks.
So in the recipe, you'll notice it says whole tomatoes. You don't have to have whole tomatoes. You can have, these are diced tomatoes. We had them in the cabinet, so we're going to use them.
Yeah.
So I just opened it, and then I'm going to drain it over the sink. It would be too liquidy to have all of that in there.
And I tend to keep canned diced tomatoes on hand at all times. It's one of the staples I keep in my pantry. You can use it for a lot of different things. And I never have whole tomatoes in it. So I think when we change up this recipe and change the amount of flour in it, we'll change it to just canned tomatoes drained.
Yes.
You want me to?
No, thank you. I should probably use.
You want a spoon?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'm just gonna get a spoon out. I was trying to pour that into there, and that was not gonna work. So,
It would just be par for tonight.
Yes.
What about fresh tomatoes?
You could use fresh tomatoes. I would just, these are peeled. So with the tomato peels, you're gonna get, and it's gonna have a little bit more liquid because of the seeds there. So if it was me, I would cut them and de-seed them and then do it, and then add a little bit of the seeds back in to get that moisture, because you don't want it just to be wet and soggy on your pizza.
okay, so got that.
But you could just take some fresh tomatoes and sprinkle them on top of your pizza and do it that way like a margarita.
That would be really good. Whole cloves of garlic, just gonna toss them in there because they'll get blended up.
It's perfect. Thank you.
In the recipe, it calls for 14.5 ounces. We've got a 28 ounce. That's why I'm doubling everything, because it has 1 cup of garlic. Now I'm doing 2 tablespoons of olive oil. You want to make sure to have olive oil versus like canola oil, because the olive oil is going to bring a really good taste to it. And then we've got 1 teaspoon of red wine vinegar. We're going to put into there. And then some oregano. This is the time that you can get the kids really involved. Have them smell the oregano. If you want to make, add more spices in there, like basil.
You put basil in, you could put some rosemary in, you could
You can even
really,
put red pepper flakes if you want it spicy.
so the kids can get together and really make this their own. And since we're using the blender and the food processor, that's a tool that if you have that at home that, you know, your child can help you with that, with supervision. They can put things into the cup, and then you can put the cup on there, and they can hit the button, they can measure the things. So it, you know, it's a way to get them really involved in the kitchen.
Okay, so I'm just gonna blend this up. Won't take very long at all. That's
long at all.
All right, now we'll go back.
So we're
to
gonna
the
say
dough.
this has rested for 10 minutes. It hasn't, but we'll pretend it has. And we are going to turn it back on until it forms a ball of dough. Pretty quick. So we're gonna do. I did not add the salt, and as Megan reminded me, we need to add the salt to it. So we'll do that and turn it back on. It's a night.
Is the salt for flavor or
The
does it-
salt is primarily for flavor.
Okay, so
It's
you
gonna be
don't
pretty
have to
bland if
use
you
salt.
don't have the salt in it. So you're gonna put just a little bit of flour down on your clean counter. Take your dough out. It's not very sticky, so it's not gonna stick to your hands very much, but you wanna knead it just a little bit until it's smooth.
Were there no blades on that, the processor? You just
This
stuck your
is
hand
this is a dough blade. So it's not a metal blade, it's a dough blade in this one. So it's the plastic blade that goes in. If you have a stand mixer, you could also do this with the dough hook in the mixer instead of using the food processor. So I've got that in a nice ball. We've got a bowl here that we have sprayed with some cooking spray, and I'm gonna put it down here and then turn it upside down so the top is oiled as well as the bottom. You're gonna cover that with some saran wrap, and you can either let it sit for an hour and 15 minutes if you're making the pizza that day, or if you're making the dough in advance, like say on a Friday and you're gonna do this on a Saturday night with your family, you could put this in the refrigerator for up to 24 hours. Just make sure you get it out of the refrigerator a couple of hours before you're ready to start cooking, because you need it to come back to room temperature. So here are some that we have done earlier.
And then we have to be real careful with this, because what we did, I did it at home and it works, but every oven's different. So
If you have a proofing feature on your
Yes.
oven, use that. If you don't, turn your oven on warm, turn it off, put it in, and then crack it open.
this is slightly cooler.
This one's fine. So we're getting this ready for the second rise. So it's been proofing for at least an hour and 15 minutes. Or this one was refrigerated and it's come back to room temperature. And we're going to put it out on the sheet pan. Yeah, but you just want to spray it. Where did you put it?
I'm like, I don't know where I put that.
It is.
A knife. Entertainment.
This is real life right here, okay? This is how you know it's real, because we keep screwing up. Hey, we never claim to be chefs. We are dietitians who cook. So if it's not stretching out, that just means it needs to come a little bit more to room temperature, which is an issue we had earlier. But what you're gonna do, once it has come to room temperature, or it has risen for an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half, you're going to stretch it out onto, and it's gonna take some working because it's not quite there. Do you
This
wanna
is
grab?
a fun time for kids. to sit
Yeah,
there
and so
really
like, this
move
is
it.
something that your kids can do. Your kids can, with clean hands, so you can teach them proper hand washing techniques. So, washing your hands with soap and warm water, getting underneath your fingernails, singing happy birthday twice while you do it, drying it on clean towel or paper towels, not on like their jeans. We saw a lot of that this summer, didn't we?
Yeah, or just making sure their hair's back, they're not touching their hair and their face.
And they can get this so it works out, and then it's gonna look like one of these eventually. But I'm gonna stop working on this right now.
And then you can go ahead and add the sauce on top of this. And then like we were saying earlier, any of the toppings that you would like to have as well. So meats or vegetables, make it really colorful.
So when we made this, when I was back in Chicago for the 4th, We did one that was just cheese. We did one that was pepperoni. We did one that was mushrooms and what did I put on there? I put on mushrooms, I put on ricotta, and I put on some pancetta. So that was really good. And then we did another one that didn't have any cheese on it, that just had roasted vegetables. So it had mushrooms and squash and onion on it, but it was cheeseless because my sister can't have any dairy. So that was able to make it so she could still enjoy pizza night.
Do you have to roast the vegetables before you put it on the pizza?
I did not roast the vegetables before. No, I did. I was using leftover roast grilled vegetables.
So it's, yeah, it's
So
really
yes,
yummy.
and we
to do it.
used grilled vegetables on it. It was
Yeah.
just some leftovers I was utilizing.
You don't have to. It
If
kind
you
of
do them
depends on
thin
the
enough,
texture.
you don't have to because they'll roast up while they're in the oven. But these I already had done because we had done roasted vegetables the night before.
Yeah. Or you can even get the jar of roasted ones
Mhm.
too. Just kind of depends on how you'd like to have it. So we're just doing mozzarella cheese. We got some that we needed to grate. And that's a fun activity for kids too. This one I know can sometimes make parents a little nervous because they can grate their little fingers. So just making sure that they're properly holding it, they have enough space, and giving them like a big chunk. You can even have them turn this way, so it's really far away. And like we were talking about earlier, you know your child, so you know if they're going to be able to have that stability to do that. So just kind of seeing on there, if anything, then they can just sprinkle it. And then we've got some Parmesan cheese as well. And we just got a grated Parmesan cheese, but you can always get some
A
really
brick
yummy
of it, and then you can
brick
grate it
ones.
yourself. Because anytime you're buying a grated cheese, it's going to have a coating of some kind of starch on it to keep it from sticking together while it's refrigerated, which I find kind of affects how it melts. So it doesn't really affect the flavor of it, but it affects the melting. And melty cheese on a pizza is a really important thing. That's why we grated our mozzarella. So you're going to put it in your 450-degree oven or on your grill if you want. And you're going to put it in there for about 16, 17 minutes. And then when it comes out, I'm not touching it with my hand. I've learned. It's going to look like that, which is kind of reminiscent of school pizza because it's, you'll have squares, which I like. So we have a question about the grains.
Oh yes, we will talk.
We're
about
getting
that.
there. So, as Lori has reminded us, we do have a variety of flours over here. I mentioned a little bit about the bread flour and why bread flour is different than, say, all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour is going to be a mixture of a soft wheat and a hard wheat. So it's kind of a medium gluten flour. It's the middle of the road. You can use it for a lot of things. And then we've got a lot of other flours here. We did a cooking demonstration earlier today for Utica Park Clinic, which we do on the second Thursdays of every month at noon. And we talked about different flours and how to use them and why they're different and why they exist. But one of the things that we talked about was the difference between refined flour and whole grain flour. So Megan's here has one from our cooking club curriculum. So in case you didn't know, Megan and I teach children about half the time.
Yeah.
And we have an after-school cooking club where we go through all 5 food groups and we have recipes and lessons associated with each one of those. And during the grain week, we talk about the parts of the grain and how with the refined flour, well, let's start with the parts of the grain. So we have 3 parts to the grain, and this is a wheat kernel that we see here. And so we've got the germ down here, we've got the endosperm here, and then we've got the bran on the outside. And we like to say that the bran is the hard coating where you get all of that good insoluble fiber, and that's going to be really good for your digestive tract. We say that the endosperm is where that starch is coming from, and whenever you have a refined grain, you're only getting the endosperm. Not saying that starch is, not good for you or bad for you, just that when you get the whole grain, you get a lot more nutrients than when you just have the endosperm in that refined grain. And then the germ, that's where you get a lot of nutrients, a lot of B vitamins are in there. It's just, that is the nutrient powerhouse right there. So when you have a whole grain, it's gonna have all 3 of those. So like this whole grain flour right here has all 3 of those parts of the grain. So you're going to get that fiber. You're going to get those nutrients. You're also going to get that starch from the endosperm. Hi,
Thank you,
Rashini. We miss you.
Yes, we do miss you.
When you have the refined grains, you're just going to be getting that endosperm. However, all refined flours, like all-purpose flour, are going to be fortified, are going to be enriched actually, with thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, and iron, and they're fortified with folic acid, which is especially important for women of childbearing age because we know that folic acid is really important for the neural development of babies as they're first growing, like in those very first, few weeks. So we've noticed, or there's been a lot of studies that as people have been transitioning to non-grain diets, cutting out refined grains, cutting out gluten, even though they don't have, celiac disease or gluten intolerance, that their levels of folic acid are going down in their system, and they're not compensating by increasing other foods or taking a supplement. So that's something just to keep note of when you are cutting certain foods out of your diet, when you're eliminating things. Try and see what nutritional impact that's going to have on you and how you can mitigate that by making different food choices.
Yeah.
So, I'm not saying you need to eat a lot of refined grains, but we want about half of our grains to be whole grains.
And then if you have a recipe that calls for all-purpose flour and you want to try to make it whole grain, you can't just do a switch because it's a lot heavier, it's denser.
It soaks up a lot more moisture, so you would have to increase the moisture in that.
Yes.
So it's always a good idea to start by using about 25% of it with the whole grain flour and then the rest with all-purpose, and kind of keep tweaking it and find that good balance to get those whole grains into it. Another way you can do that is by using maybe a different grain flour. So this afternoon we made a muffin that used all-purpose flour mixed with oat flour, which is basically just taking oats and grinding them up into a flour. We did it in a blender. You can also just buy oat flour. And it's a good way to start adding some whole grains to some of your recipes. It adds a nice nuttiness, it adds some moisture, but it's not quite as dense as some of the other whole grain flours that you might find. So I liked that. I thought it was really good. And then we also have in front of us some of the other flours that are not made out of grains. So we've got some coconut flour, some almond flour, some potato flour. Those are going to be naturally gluten-free. So if you are a person who cannot process the protein gluten, then those are important to have in your arsenal when you're trying to bake. But just remember, because these don't have any natural gluten in them, that means that the structure that gluten provides in baked goods is not going to be there. So you need to make sure that you're using a combination of things to try and get that, to mimic that structure. So that's why when you find like the gluten-free blends, they're not just a rice flour or an almond flour. This one is a blend of rice flour, potato starch, pea fiber, tapioca starch, and xanthan gum. And all of those things will work together to kind of mimic what this all-purpose flour does. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there who think that going gluten-free is going to be healthier than eating a wheat flour, but gluten is just a protein. And if you can process that protein, then I would say it's probably a better chance to use a combination of whole grains and refined grains when you're baking than trying to make it gluten-free unless you're one of the people that can't process that protein. And also, gluten-free is pretty expensive and it lacks a lot of fiber, because they don't even list fiber on this here. So you're not going to get any of that in any of those gluten-free baked goods.
And you may have noticed, like if you've had gluten-free baked goods, like Melissa was just talking about with the structure, it's just not as satisfying or soft, or so keeping that in mind too. It's just not, doesn't taste quite as good sometimes.
But I think that there's a common misconception that gluten-free is healthier, and that's not the case. If you can't process gluten, obviously cut it out of your diet. If you can, there's no reason for it not to be there.
Yeah.
So that was my goal for today.
Yes.
So here is our pizza, and like I said, Lori's going to be posting that recipe in the comments, and it's going to be great. But remember, when you do it, it is 2 2/3 cups of flour, not 1 2/3 cups. It will not be doughy if you don't do it
You'll
that
have
way.
to add a ton of extra flour when you're kneading it.
Yes, you may also notice in the comments that we've got a link to a survey so you can tell us how we've done, what you like, what you'd like us to do. We do have the topics for all of our classes planned out, however, we don't have all of the recipes written. So if there's something that you want, we could probably figure out a way to get that recipe, or at least research and figure out that there's a way that we can do it. And it is back to school season, so let THD help get your child back to school ready. We have 2 immunization clinics with extended hours. If you want more information, just go to tulsa-health.org/back to school. That's back to school. So we will see you in September on the 14th?
Yeah, the second.
The second
Thursday.
Thursday of September, which I believe is the 14th, and we're going to be doing sheet pan dinners that night. So I actually have already written the recipes for that one. So, but other than that, I hope you have a good evening. Enjoy your pizza. We'll see you later. Bye.